Okay, well, welcome to Will Work for Food, the New Possibilities Hour. Every week we present, every week since the spring of 2000. We and you have all been here, there, yon, but back here to enjoy and learn from another Will Work for Food program. And today we have a very different and unique Will Work for Food program. It's not about how, to negotiate, or be a mediator or this or that. It's really the end result of negotiating for yourself, for your own mediation or arbitration, your ADR practice, your law firm, maybe even. So it'll be very unique and great to see. So today our special guest is Diana Mercer. She is a retired, highlight on the word retired, attorney-mediator who will present to us about how to craft and cash in on your mediation practice. Essentially, when you're ready to retire or switch gears, then if you wanted to sell your practice. She did this after she retired in, I think it was 2013. Her mediation practice was Talks Mediation Services. And in 2013, she decided that it was time to do all those other things in life that she had wanted to do and hadn't done so far. And so she sold her practice, which she had built from the ground up. And then she did a few of these things and left the law behind. She'd been a practicing attorney and had been mediating since 2000, so 13 years of mediating. Now she's written a book. She's written a book called Making Divorce Work, 8 Essential Keys to Resolving Conflict and Rebuilding Your Life. Your divorce advisor, lawyer, and a psychologist guide you through the legal and emotional landscape of divorce, and 8 simple keys to building and growing your mediation or arbitration practice. She's an active blogger. She wrote for the Huffington Post. She maintains an interactive Making Divorce Work blog. She had, all the wonderful credentials that we all like to have as we advance in our careers. She is admitted to practice law in California, New York, Connecticut, Pennsylvania. A lot of bar exams are opting in, if you could, maybe out of one of the bars to some of the others. And she also is licensed to practice before the Supreme Court of the United States. Since her retirement, she's attended culinary school in the United States and France, written a novel, played in the World Series of Poker, traveled extensively, renovated houses, learned all kinds of things. Basically, she's lived the life that apparently she's always wanted to live, and I'm sure has enjoyed almost every moment of it. I'm sure, life is life, right? There's great times and there's other times, but Diana today is going to tell us all about how we can do the same thing. Maybe the poker's not your thing, but whatever your thing may be. And so before we get to that, let's find out from David. Can you please tell us what is the running total now of donations to food banks, of which we have been told?
Yeah, thank you, Jean. Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure. The total as of today is an astounding $872,000, 821, excuse me, $872,821.34. That's 872,821. Really just a testament to the generosity of our audience. Thanks, everyone. And today's going to be a great day.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
absolutely. Thank you, David. I will admit the 4 of us, David, Jeff, Natalie, and myself, we placed some bets, no money at stake, but just personal honor as to how high this number will be come January 1st. So thank you all, and keep it going. It's just wonderful. And so without further ado, we've got the second helpings, which is the food bank that Diana had suggested. Natalie will put that information in the chat. And I'll ask Diana, if you would say a few words about second helpings when I say the floor is yours. And everyone, again, for any donation you can make, small or large, that would be so appreciated. And please let one of us know the amount so that we can add it to our neutral running total. No names or amounts, identified together. So Diana, let's turn it over to you. How you made it, what you'd have to suggest, and first of all, if you could tell us about second helping, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you so much. So, Second Helpings is a food bank here in Indianapolis. They do a three-part approach to addressing hunger and poverty in central Indiana. Each day they volunteer, their volunteers and staff rescue and and take perishable food from wholesalers, retailers, and restaurants, which prevents unnecessary waste. And then they take that food to create 5,000 nutritious meals every day that they distribute to more than 100 social service agencies that help Hoosiers in need. Using that same rescued food, the Second Helpings culinary team job training program. So what they do is they also run a culinary program. They prepare adults with barriers to employment for careers in the food service industry. And so those are the folks that prepare the food. It's a really neat program that they run, and they do a couple of uh, events for fundraisers in the community too. They have a Super Bowl, SOUP, between the last football playoff and the Super Bowl, and their various culinary school graduates and some local restaurants prepare soups that you can buy a ticket and go and sample, which is always a lot of fun. And you see lots of friends that you haven't seen in a long time, and it's just a neat event that you can go to. So it's a really interesting and neat charity that does a lot of sort of 360 in the food um, insecurity world. So I'm happy to represent them today.
Thank you so much. Sounds great. Now, how did you do it, and what did you do?
Ugh, I'm exhausted just hearing all of this stuff, but you start it one little piece at a time. Um, I know Natalie Armstrong Motam because she was my marketing consultant. And thankfully, I consulted her early on and listened to her. A lot of this stuff is a lot of work, and you just, like how you eat an elephant, you have to bite it off one piece at a time. And you're never going to get all of it done every day. But for all of those days that you aren't busy mediating or arbitrating or doing actual paid work, you really need to keep yourself busy doing, um, your marketing work or preparing. Ultimately, you're preparing, if you're attending this seminar, to sell your practice. And so what we're going to talk about today is making sure that you've got something to sell. Um, so really what you need to ask yourself from the beginning is, if I was to disappear today, what would be left of my practice? Um, could your staff carry on without you? And if they couldn't, then you really don't have much to sell, and then that would be a big problem. All right. So many of us are solo practitioners, right? We've got our own style and we supervise our staff and we're in charge. So if your practice is super heavily dependent on your presence, you don't have anything to sell. Um, so if you want to retire and you want to sell your practice, don't let your ego get in the way. The time to think about selling is long before you actually plan to sell. Um, so the first thing you need to think about, well, always, no matter what you're doing, and it doesn't matter what business you're in, you're going to need good financials. And if you want to, you're always going to need to think about goodwill, tangible assets, and also probably, and most importantly, if you really are looking to sell your intellectual property. But you're also going to need somebody who knows what to do if you're not around. Perhaps this is in the form of an estate plan, corporate documents, or partnership agreement. The second two are easier because ideally you will have spelled out what happens if one or more, if you've got corporate officers or partners, because your documents are going to say what happens if somebody becomes incapacitated. And if they don't say that already, then they need to. At least one of the principals is still going to be around to carry on. But if you're a solo, you're going to need to talk to somebody about how to go about selling your business and give them the power to do that. You can do this with an estate plan or a power of attorney. I didn't have any partners when I founded Peace Talks in 2000. So I instructed my husband what to do if I became incapacitated or I predeceased him. I lived in Los Angeles, and he was a puppeteer who worked in the entertainment industry. He was in Men in Black 1 and 2. He was the flowers in Pee Wee's Playhouse window. He worked the seat of the chair in Pee Wee's Playhouse. So if I hadn't told him what to do, he was going to have no idea what he was going to do because he wasn't familiar with the mediation industry. So, some folks are going to need a lot of instruction, but we're going to assume for today that you're happy and you're healthy and you're ready to take that cruise around the world. Excuse me. One of the most straightforward tasks you're going to have, though, is to get your financials in order. I did my own books. They were in okay shape. They were, good enough to get my taxes done by a professional. But once I got audited by the IRS, I learned exactly how crummy a bookkeeper I was. If you're going to get ready to sell your practice, you're probably going to want to have a professional bookkeeper or an accountant straighten up your last 3 years of day-to-day bank records and filing. I was using QuickBooks. I probably should have hired a Quicken person to straighten those out or to do them for me. I was trying to run on as thin of a shoestring as I could, so I was doing that stuff myself, and it worked fine before I was trying to sell, but I ended up selling to one of my mediators, so it wasn't such a big deal, but the IRS audit lady wasn't so happy with me. But if you're going to sell to a stranger or you're going to use a business broker, you're going to want super clean financial records that are extremely consistent. Like I said, I wasn't bad, but it wasn't good enough, I don't think, if I had been selling to a stranger. And of course, you will want to have professionally prepared tax returns unless you happen to be a tax whiz. Your buyer is probably going to get an accountant to do a business valuation, and you don't want there to be any question whatsoever about whether your records are accurate, because that starts to cast doubt on whether or not you've been honest in your business dealings, and that's about the last thing you need. Your buyer's also going to be looking for an upward trend in income, ideally net income. And if you're preparing to sell, you may be looking at spending more hours working, marketing, and or cutting back expenses. I was speaking with a colleague, some of you may remember Michelle Obradovic. She sold a mediation practice before I did, and I was talking with her about how she put all that together. And she said she and her partner worked it up to $1 million in income. She was flying all over the country doing mediations, and so was he. And they were, just working their tushes off, getting it up to that amount of income so that they were in a position to sell, and to get the maximum dollar amount for it. In the alternative, a buyer may see an opportunity that you are missing if your income is decreasing. Decreasing income may not prevent a sale, but it certainly will impact the amount of the sale price. So if you're really just looking to get out, the fact that your income is decreasing and not increasing is not going to prevent that. But you want to keep in mind that it obviously would be better if your income is increasing. A rule of thumb, and it is just a rule of thumb, is that 3 times your net income is what you could be looking at for a sale price, but most serious buyers are going to be looking at doing a business valuation. Your books that are ready for inspection are just the starting point, however. That is your institutional or enterprise value. Your goodwill is the intangible part of what the buyer is going to be buying. Your professional or personal goodwill is the intangible value that is going to continue to inure to the business without the presence of a specific owner. This is from Wikipedia. Professional goodwill may be described as the intangible value attributable solely to the efforts or reputation of an owner of the business. And the key difference between the types of goodwill is whether the goodwill is transferable upon sale to a third party without a non-competition agreement. So, as I said before, a big part of your business valuation is how heavily the practice relies on you personally and your individual reputation and personality. Institutional goodwill is more saleable than professional goodwill. A good analogy for selling your practice is like an accountant selling a practice versus a doctor selling a practice. Now, I'm not positive a doctor is allowed to sell a practice, but I don't know. But when you think about it in terms of an analogy or a hypothetical, an accountant's going to have a higher valuation because any qualified accountant can do your taxes. There's very few superstar accountants. You don't trust them with your life and you don't get naked in front of them, contrasted with a doctor. Most of the accountant's clients are going to stay with the practice because why transfer your records if you don't have to? The number one specialist in the medical field is going to have a really hard time selling a practice because once number one is gone, it's likely most of the patients are going to leave too and start looking for number two in the field. And you don't trust everybody to get naked in front of, let's face it. So if all of your branding is based on you, your name, your reputation, your standing in the community, it's going to be a lot tougher to sell your practice than if you've marketed under a more generic name, perhaps working with a group of practitioners. So if you consider something like, Judge Smith grew up in the community, has a wide circle of friends, does a lot of charity work, and used to be the mayor of the town where Smith Mediation is located. Smith Mediation is a thriving practice because she's known as a fair and ethical mediator with a high settlement rate. She'd like to retire, though, and is looking for a successor, as opposed to Hometown Mediation Associates, which is a mediation firm located in the same community. There's 3 mediators, 1 retired judge and 2 established attorneys, all with good reputations, but nowhere near the social status of Judge Smith. They work hard at marketing, and Hometown Mediation has decent name recognition in the legal community. Hometown is actually going to have an easier time selling because it's not so tied to just one personality. To sell, Judge Smith is going to need to hire a mediator or 2, hitch them to her wagon, so to speak, so that Smith Mediation can transition into a more generalized name, or at least Smith and Jones Mediation, so that Judge Smith doesn't have to work forever or just dissolve her successful practice. So if you've been cultivating only personal goodwill, it's really time to start to build up institutional goodwill. That's one of the reasons I named my practice Talks Mediation Services, and also an important part of why I started to develop intellectual property that allowed me to train mediators so that we all used a similar style and technique and the same forms and the same procedures. And I'll get to this intellectual property stuff in a minute because that's really going to be the backbone of how you're going to be able to sell your practice, to the point where I didn't actually do any mediations anymore. And so it wasn't so tied to me personally. Peace Talks was really able to continue without me and has actually thrived without me, which is something that I'm actually very proud of. So, a lot of lawyers are kind of egotistical, and good for us, because you can't get up in a courtroom and start spouting stuff without having a certain amount of ego and self-confidence behind you. But, we're talking about selling here. And in order to do that, you need to be able to step back a little bit. Natalie and Jeff Kitchaven and I were at a conference, an ABA conference in New York City. It's been a couple of years ago. And we were all standing in line to check in. And it's an ABA conference, so everybody in line is dressed in a suit. Everybody in line is a lawyer. Everybody in line is checking in. And this one woman jumps to the front of the line and says, "I'm a lawyer. I need to check in right now. It's very important." And I'm just thinking, lady, everybody here is a lawyer. You got to remember who you are and where you are in the business, and it's not going to be all about you all of the time. And not that any of us are like that, but um, when you can name things more generically and step back yourself is when you're going to start to create real value that you're going to be able to sell. Tangible assets in 2013 were a lot more important than they are now. A lot has changed. There's a lot more overlap, I think, now with intangible assets, intellectual property, and internet assets, which is the most important part of this talk, which I'm getting to. I think an established telephone number is still important. You want it to be established enough that it's accurate on the internet. You don't want people calling and getting somebody else, or that dee thing that, says that they can't get a hold of you anymore. Some people are going to want to contact you via email, or DM in some fashion, but some people still want to talk in person or on Zoom. They want to make sure that you're real, and you want to be able to reach those people. There's a lot more what they call gray divorces now, and some of the boomers, I guess I'm actually included in that um, arena, given that I'm 61. A lot of people uh, want that personal touch, and so you need to be contactable by telephone. And so you can't go around changing your phone number, and that I consider to be a tangible asset. A long-time talented staff always was important, and I think always will be important to such a personal field. There's going to be times when you may need to use an answering service with a script. Um, you just want a good one. But a really great staff uh, is invaluable, as I'm sure you all know. Um, I think an established office location is probably less important than it used to be. Your office layout and furniture, probably less important than it used to be. But I had a beautiful client library that took up most of my office space, and I, tried really hard to welcome people. If you have a building that's sold along with your practice or a long lease, that, at least used to be really important. I've been out of the game now for 12 years, so these are things you're going to have to weigh for yourself. The most important thing, I think, these days are going to be your intellectual property. And that is really, I think, what you've got to sell. Mark Volman of the Turtles died a couple of days ago, and I was hearing about their contract with their record company, and the contract was so awful that the record company not only owned the name The Turtles, they also owned the people's individual names, which is why they ended up going by Flo and Eddie, which was not their real names. And it kind of made me laugh because when I sold Peace Talks, I also sold all of the social media names associated with me and Peace Talks. So I actually sold at Diana Mercer. In addition to like all the web domains and all of that stuff. And so me, like Flo and Eddie, ended up having to register I had to register different names on Twitter, now X, and Instagram and all of that stuff. But that was part of what I was able to sell. And I had, oh gosh, it was Twitter at the time, but I had, I don't know, 100,000 followers or something. And also, the YouTube channel was Peace Talks. But yeah, so be prepared to sell stuff like that. And so when you can register it as something other than your own name, if you want to carry on anything, from your own name in the future, you're going to, want to brand it as something other than your actual name, which, goes back to the whole enterprise branding versus personal branding. But, in terms of your intellectual property, you're going to need a website with good content. I remember back in 2000 when I was starting my practice, there was a lot of nattering about how, lawyers and professionals didn't need websites, and that wasn't like, it was sort of beneath professionals and all this kind of nonsense. And I was very fortunate to not believe that, and, registered my domain name really early on, which got me great search engine optimization results from the beginning. And, you know, consistently with search engine optimization, content is king. And that has never changed. I started out with really good content and kept it and enhanced it. And, whenever I wasn't mediating, I would be writing. I started out as not such a fabulous writer, and over time, by practicing and practicing and practicing, I became a much better writer and, ended up writing a couple of books and doing various things that also were intellectual property. And, um, you learn by doing. I didn't start out being so terrific at any of these things. I didn't know anything about marketing. I didn't know anything about websites. I mean, it was the wild, wild west back in 2000 when I started my practice. Um, you know, that it's insane to think about it now, but um, those were all just, the website was, it's just so funny to think about it now that the website was just basic and there were some links and stuff. There were not videos and all of this stuff that's embedded now. With the fabulous pictures and functionality that it has. But it's very important that you have a good website company, unless you're some sort of a maniac who knows how to do web research and design, and you keep way on top of the SEO stuff. I knew how important that was to my particular business. I can be kind of an interesting mix of outgoing and introverted at the same time. And I knew that I was not the networker that the person who bought my practice, Stephanie Maloney, was. I mean, she was a master networker, and she was just terrific. And I knew that sometimes I could be a little hit or miss with it. So I knew that my strong suit was always going to be that kind of, under the line, below the line marketing with the kind of back channel stuff like the website stuff and writing articles and that kind of thing. In retrospect, if I had partnered with her at the very beginning, I think we would have taken over the world. And she might be doing that now. And I am so proud of her and Peace Talks and the foundation that I laid that she's just taking off with. That I'm very happy about the backbone that I created with the website and stuff, but I knew that, like, at the beginning, 100% of our business came from the website, and then it turned into about 70% as word of mouth started to get going. Los Angeles is an enormous market, and trying to make inroads by, like, just regular networking and stuff, especially since I had moved there as an adult who had my original practice was in Connecticut. So, making inroads with lawyers and therapists and potential referral sources that I had not gone to school with, gone to college with, gone to law school with. I grew up in Indiana. I went to Indiana University. Then I practiced in Connecticut, which was a sophisticated market, but demographically a much smaller market. And then moved, to get married to California as a 35-year-old with 10 years of practice under my belt. I came into the Los Angeles market as a fully formed lawyer and adult. And, to these folks, I came out of nowhere, knowing what I was doing, And I think a lot of people found that confrontational and confusing. And, I was also pretty aggressive about marketing and stuff because, when your husband is in the entertainment business, it's very, feast or famine. When he was working on these big movies, he made a lot of money, and then he would go for a year without working. And so I was the consistent breadwinner. But when I quit my job at the Los Angeles um, courthouse, I was the supervising research attorney there. Um, and I finally quit for good just before September 11th, 2001, which is a day that we can remember today, being September 11th, 24 years later. It was a pretty scary time for the country and also for business people because, as somebody who had just quit her, not very well paying but steady full-time job, it was, with a husband who worked sporadically, it was pretty scary. Um, and so I needed to be really certain that what I was doing was going to work and that it was that I didn't really have a choice about that. Los Angeles is not a cheap place to live, and you can't be goofing around. And so I think I came off as kind of intimidating and maybe a little too driven for a cadre of attorneys and therapists and whatever that had been, familiar with one another. They went to college together, they went to law school together, they knew each other, they had their little, study groups and cliques and stuff. And who was this person who was coming in? I mean, not to say that I was like a jerk or anything. It's just like, who is this person who seems to know what they're doing, but didn't like grow up with us? Anyway, enough about that. Just to say that a lot of attorneys are not used to doing a lot of marketing and are not used to pushing as hard as I was doing. I ultimately made professional friends, but it was definitely a tough row to hoe, to use a good Indiana farm expression. Um, and so, as I started the website and that sort of thing was really important. I did a lot of writing and published a lot of articles. You will find that publications, now mostly online, but certainly back then, a lot of stuff was print, are hungry for writers. Certainly content that they can get for free, which I sort of feel bad about because that leaves professional journalists a little bit in the lurch because, we do want professional people in industries like that to get paid. And when there's jerks like me who are willing to do it for free, it does not help their plight any, but it is a good way for people like us to get notoriety and, publications. And when you do get a lot of publications, it's easier to get speaking gigs and hired for trainings and that sort of thing, which also then helps you promote yourself. When you do online articles and stuff, you can then get a live backlink to your website or to any other materials that you've got. And then that also helps to promote your website and drive traffic, which then also helps your search engine optimization. I think there's lots of tricks with search engine optimization that do change over time, but I think things like backlinks and anything that drives traffic is going to be evergreen and is not going to change. Anything that helps to make your website more popular and drive traffic is always going to be good for your website. So anything that's going to backlink to your website is going to be good. There is a really important book that if you haven't read it or, you know, absorbed it in some way is you need to, is Michael Gerber's E-Myth Revisited. And there's a really good video. I will put the link in the chat. It's in the materials at the end. Let's see. Ooh, where am I? I just love that I don't have to keep up with this stuff so much anymore. It's wonderful. You will want to, it's 5 minutes. You will want to watch this if you have not. And basically what Gerber is saying in the book is if you're going to do something more than once or twice, you're going to want a written procedure for it. And one of the first examples he gives in the last version of this that I read is making coffee. And it seems so simplistic and in a way sort of stupidly so, but if you've got more than you in your office, you'd be surprised how many times you have to explain to somebody how to use the coffee machine. And if you've got a written procedure for that, you will not have to explain that again. And so if a stranger walks into your office and can read the procedure on how to make coffee, then you don't have to explain it. And if you aren't in the office, nobody else has to explain it either. And that's obviously a very, ground floor level explanation of the kinds of things you need procedures for. But for me, ultimately, it's the very ground floor of what ends up being your mediator training manual or your office training manual, and ultimately your franchise Bible. A franchise Bible is the thing that if you bought a Subway franchise or a McDonald's franchise or a Service Master franchise or any business franchise, Liberty Tax, for example, you would get what you're buying in essence is the franchise Bible in addition to some other support services. And that the value in buying a franchise is that you don't have to invent the wheel. You have all of the procedures spelled out in great detail of exactly how things should work. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into writing a franchise Bible. And that is the value in buying a franchise. You don't have to figure all this stuff out. And a couple of months after I sold Peace Talks to Stephanie, she said, I had no idea how valuable everything you did was. I would have had no idea how to set all of this stuff up and all of the like job role descriptions and the evaluations, how you evaluate the performance of the mediators and how where and what you post to find a new mediator and what it is you're looking for and the criteria that you're looking for and how you would evaluate a job candidate after they came in for an interview and how you evaluate how a mediation session went after the mediation session and how you open up the office in the morning and how all of this stuff and even setting up payroll and getting that to work and just all of this little stuff that when you think about it really is it's the essence of the business, but it's a mess if you don't have it written down. And when you try to recreate it every single time you're posting a job notice to get a new mediator, or you're trying to evaluate the performance of a mediator that doesn't sync in with what their role description is, you're really just spinning your wheels. And it was something that really opened my eyes. And I've been in situations since. For example, my condo HOA board, I knew it. I knew when I became a lawyer, they tell you they're going to try to get you on the condo board. Don't do it. I knew better. I did. And I did it anyway. And I'm sorry. Anyway, and they're looking for a new manager, and then they want to evaluate after they've, so they use this old role description that has, it doesn't seem to have anything to do with anything. And they post that, and then they hire somebody that doesn't seem to have any of the experience that they need. And of course, that person has nothing to do with the outdated role description that they posted. And then in a year, they want to evaluate how well this person is doing. And they have no criteria upon which to do this because they don't have any standard system of doing that. Now, those of you who've worked in bigger law firms probably are saying, well, yeah, of course, Diana, this is something that we've had in place for years. But for those of us who have worked in smaller practices that have operated a lot more informally, this is something you really, really need to have. And it just was, it flabbergasted me really that, once I had learned about this and adopted it in my own practice, that a bigger organization with like a $6 million budget didn't have this. And you will be so glad when you do have it. And then when you sell your practice, it is something really important to have. And maybe your buyer only appreciates it a few months later. But these manuals and written procedures are a very important part of what you're selling. Another really important thing that we established in peace talks was a way that we did things. And I definitely had mediators who bucked up against this, and ultimately they just weren't a good fit for the practice. But I wanted, even though I wasn't doing the mediations, I felt like over time we had established a style and a way of doing mediations that had worked really well. Now, of course, mediators and arbitrators and lawyers are all different. We do things in a different way, but like, for example, when you're in a courtroom, you're following the rules of civil procedure. So in a way, we're doing things in our own way, but we're also doing things more alike than we are differently. And because we're following certain structures and rules. And I set peace talks mediations up that same way so that there would be individual differences, but it would also follow a structure. And all of these structures went into the mediator manual. So for example, we would, the structure of our mediations was at the very first session, we would go over our fee agreement. This time was off the clock. I wanted to make sure that everybody was on the same page. The thing was like, I don't know, 8 or 10 pages long. I wanted to make sure that everybody had read it, which the clients never had. So we went over it. I summarized each paragraph. The clients initialed each page, and then they would sign it at the end after we had answered any questions. That was all off the clock so that nobody felt rushed. And so that also nobody could say, well, I didn't understand it. I didn't read it. I signed it without reading it. That sometimes took a half an hour or 45 minutes, but I really felt like that was time well spent so that nobody argued about it. Now, there's plenty of lawyers and mediators who would say, I would never, ever waste time like that and pay. We did all of our mediations in a co-mediation model with a lawyer and a therapist. And ultimately, over time, I did everything with a lawyer, a therapist, and a financial professional. So I'm paying 3 people to be in that room at the same time. I would never pay 3 people, uh, to be in that room while I'm not getting paid for that time. And, obviously you're going to do things the way you feel is the best way to do it. But I always felt like that was a good way that was a good investment on my part. And we never had a fee dispute. So anyway, that was something that went into our procedures manual. And if a mediator didn't want, they were getting paid, so I don't know why they would care. But if they didn't want to do it that way, then they didn't work for us. I mean, no harm, no foul. But, then the next thing that we would do was, get a little bit of background information and let them tell a little bit of their story. And then we would set an agenda. And we actually had an agenda checklist of some of the things that they might, you know, want to put on the agenda just to keep the discussion flowing and that sort of thing. And so we had kind of a way that we would go about it to keep the discussion flowing and to help the clients along. We tried not to rush them, and if something came up, we would deal with it in the moment. And that's where I felt like that 3-mediator model worked really well. But anyway, that is, the skeleton of what went into the mediator manual. And that ultimately became the intellectual property as part of the written procedure that ultimately went into the franchise Bible. I didn't end up franchising, but I do know that Stephanie has several locations now. I assume that they are using that franchise Bible, at least informally. I don't think she's actually done a formal franchise situation, but everybody who's working there, I assume, is using the mediator manuals, and there was a mediation assistant manual, and I ultimately put together a 40-hour training with a manual, and all of this stuff was sold as part of the practice. So it wasn't just the practice that was getting sold and the goodwill and the flow of income. It was all this intellectual property that went along with it, and that really upped the value. There are a lot of resources to help you get to this place. This is something that happened over 13 years. This is not something I did, from September 11th, 2001 to, December 31st, 2001. This is something that took place over time. One of the first things I asked Natalie when we got together is, do I need a business plan? And she said, no, you do not need a business plan, because I wasn't going to a bank for money. In retrospect, she was right. I did not need a business plan then. But later, as I was looking at expanding and looking toward the future, a business plan was a good idea, not in terms of going to the bank for money, but in terms of, okay, where am I now taking stock, and where do I want to be in terms of projections, and, where was I looking to go? And I think ultimately, when I'm looking at selling the practice, having a business plan in place was a good idea. There's a lot of online resources and stuff, but I got a lot of really great resources through local business groups. For me, in particular, that was the National Association of Women Business Owners, LA chapter, that happened to be really well run and active in Los Angeles. There's chapters all over the country. I think for men there, and just in general, there's probably more established organizations. But through NAWBO, I joined a competition called Make Mine $1 Million Business from this organization, Count Me In, that ended up offering a lot of opportunities and resources. And then NAWBO sponsored actually gave out scholarships to a class at UCLA, Management Development for Entrepreneurs. And even if I hadn't gotten a scholarship to that, that would have been a really good investment. What it was a class that was offered, I think it was 1 day a week. It was kind of like an executive MBA, but it was only like, I don't know, 10 or 20 weeks, and just, 1 day a week, or maybe it was 1 day a month even. No, it was a semester, I think. Anyway, it was a special thing through the business school for people who probably should have gone to business school, but who didn't, and who are already in business. So this is something that your local business school or even college might offer. And one of the things that they also offered at UCLA was you could get a business student to come over and evaluate your business for a special project. Like if you were wondering, should I buy a building, or Should I expand to this market, or should I offer an additional service? I know that my cooking school in France actually got a French business school to do the same kind of a study for them. So this is, widely offered. If they offer it in France, I'm sure they offer it in your community. So you can get resources, from your local business school. So there's lots of places that you can look in terms of getting some help. This MDE program at UCLA, each week was a different topic. And one of the things that they offered was a business improvement plan that you worked on, where you identified what your opportunities and challenges were, what your strengths and weaknesses were, and then what your SMART goals were. Ooh, if I could only remember. They were specific, measurable. I think you determined how actionable they were, like take uh, when you would take the time to do them. R T Oh gosh, we can look that up. But SMART goals, I think you know what they are. Um, and it forced you to write all that stuff down, and then you would pinpoint exactly what you were going to do. And some of it was a brainstorming thing, and then you would then determine what you were going to do first and what was most important. And taking the time to write all that stuff down was really helpful, because otherwise it's just going to swirl around in your head. And when you've got all of this stuff down on paper and it's written down, you've really got something that you can sell, which is, um, this is how you get yourself to a point where you can sell something. That's my prepared notes.
So Diana, I think the one thing that really sets your practice apart from so many others is that when you and I sat down face to face, and you said, all right, how do I build this business? And I said, well, first, well done that you recognize that you're in business. So you have to be a savvy business person. And in our industry, we generally build our practices through writing, speaking, training, and networking, because in 2001, social media wasn't such a big thing. And so I said, do any of those things appeal to you? Is one activity sort of a strong suit, one more than the other? And you said, oh no, I'll do all of those. And the difference is your success is the result of you didn't just do all of those things, you did them really, really well, and in a way that nobody else in the LA basin was doing them. You really worked at your business. It wasn't just a hobby. It wasn't just something that you did on the side. It wasn't something that you talked about and then didn't actually, have it come to fruition. We sat down together, we set up goals, and you went out and you attacked that goal with everything you had. And that hard work, that we've laughed about how many different pairs of shoes did you wear holes in, going to all of these events and airplanes and hotels and writing and speaking and training and collaborating and being ever present. That took an enormous amount of effort. And so your success is, yes, the SOPs, yes, the entrepreneurship, yes, the business savvy, yes, listening to what clients wanted and then providing that. Yes, all of those things, it had a cumulative effect, that really was an enormous amount of effort, but the success is there when you do the hard work.
Well, and you never know what's going to work. That's the other thing, is you don't know when you're going to meet that person that refers you business opportunity after business opportunity after business opportunity. The one thing I really hated was networking, because I didn't know how to do it. Actually, a good, I think, $15 investment is that book that Jim Davis and I wrote, How to Market Your Mediation Practice, or 8 Simple Keys. It's available on Amazon. If you Google my name, it comes up. Natalie, if you would put the cover in the chat, if you can, I don't know. It's I learned this really key thing, which was and I didn't know it before, if people are talking like this face to face, they're telling you they don't want to be interrupted. Because I could never know who to approach if I was talking to strangers. If they're talking like this in an open fashion, go right up and talk to them. They're saying, we want somebody to join us. And so when I knew not to walk up to these people, but to walk up to these people, like a whole world opened up to me. I don't know why I was so obtuse about that. It was just so much easier for me at that point. And then the other thing was, like, if I just wasn't feeling it, I wouldn't force myself to do it. I mean, there's people like Stephanie Maloney who are just naturals, and I don't know, I mean, she's like 6'2" also, and this got this big blonde hair, like she just, I don't know, people want to talk to her. Um, I'm 5'2" and I don't know, people like overlook me, I don't know. But once I knew don't talk, then it was like, hi. And people love to talk about themselves. And at the very least, I would have a good conversation with people, and then I would know whether or not I wanted to follow up with them. It's not going out and saying, hi, I'm Diana Mercer, I'm a mediator. Why don't you send me business? It's let me figure out who this person is and whether this is somebody I want to have another conversation with. The goal is not so pointed when you're networking. Go figure.
We also worked really hard on finding you the right networking opportunities. So you tried all of the professional organizations, all the different animal groups, the elks, the moose, all the different clubs. You did the International Chambers of Commerce. You did all of the Toastmasters and the women's groups. You did all the networking groups. So you tried all of them, and were finally able to settle on the ones that were really comprised of your people, your sources of referral, or the people that you really had a good fit with. And that just takes time and tenacity to find those conversations.
Well, and the other thing that you helped me do was to evaluate the return on investment. I joined this networking group. I think there's a lot of them around. Like, there was one called Latip. This one was Provisors. It was expensive to join. And you'd go to these meetings that would be they were so early in the morning. I think they were yesterday. They were the day before, and then you would get in what they called a troika. So they'd assign you and two other people to get together for breakfast. Um, Sometimes I could talk people into like happy hour, so I wouldn't have to get up so early. And then or lunch or whatever. And then I realized that I got like $30,000 or $40,000 worth of business out of these referrals that I got from these people every year. But I was spending like this disproportionate amount of time and money on these lunches, and the time away from the office was costing me $30,000 or $40,000. And so it was like a zero sum ultimately. And people couldn't believe that I was daring to quit this group. They're like, but don't you get a lot of business from it? And I'm like, I do, but I'm not making any money from this business. So you also have to look at what is giving you a good return, because ultimately it wasn't worth the effort. And you got to have the guts to quit what isn't working. And that was rough.
But it's the business sense to know that it needs to be measured, needs to be looked at. And so again, the key strength in you having built such a powerhouse of a practice that you could then retire at a relatively young age and go off to cooking school and write novels and travel and have fun and play in poker championships. The real key to that is that you are a really savvy business person who happened to be in the field of mediation and helping families, and so really focusing on that is the way that you were able to leverage all your hard work into the fun.
Well, and that's what a big point that Michael Gerber makes in the E-Myth is: you are not a mediator who has a business. You are a business person who has a mediation business. And if you're a mediator who has a business, you're not going to sell your practice. And you know what? If you don't want to have a business, don't. That's fine. There's no shame in that. But if you're if you're a business person who wants to get a business who can sell the business, that's a different animal.
That is. Well, Diana, it is the top of the hour. As always, it's so nice talking to you
Yes.
and catching up. And I love what you created and love what you were able to leverage it into. And if you didn't know, Diana has used her retirement to write a novel about cooking school. And so you log on to Amazon, you can find her books, you can find some of the intellectual property pieces that she's been talking about on Amazon, and I created a document and put the hyperlinks in there. But just generally, well done. Good for you, Diana. It's been lovely having you on We'll Work for Food.
I couldn't have done it without you, Natalie. Thank you all for attending, and good luck.